Yielding back, the chair recognizes myself for 5 minutes. I'm playing cleanup here, and let me address a couple of things. First, in response to the question and answer provided earlier, the NSBA letter, the National School Board Association letter, dated September 29, 2021, does indeed specifically equate the actions of concerned parents at school board meetings with domestic terrorism. Here's the quote from page 2 of that letter. These actions could be the equivalent to a form of domestic terrorism and hate crimes, unquote. I'm going to read you one other excerpt, and this is also from page 2 of another document. This has been entered into the record. This is the interim staff report, Committee on the Judiciary, on a manufactured issue and misapplied priorities. Subpoenaed documents show no legitimate basis for the Attorney General's anti-parent memo. The excerpt I'm about to read you, I think, explains the why, because a lot of people have wondered why. Why would the Biden administration and the Department of Justice act when it did on that infamous now school board memo? Quote, page 2. The documents received pursuant to this committee's subpoena show the absence of a legitimate nationwide basis for the Attorney General's directive to insert federal law enforcement into local school board matters. The documents also shed light onto how the administration worked with education special interests to generate the predicate for the Attorney General's directive. It appears from these documents and the information received that the administration's actions were a political offensive meant to quell swelling discord over controversial education curricula and unpopular school board decisions. The Attorney General's directive, here it is, came just weeks before a pivotal gubernatorial election in Virginia, in which education policies were hotly debated and a local school board's actions were under intense scrutiny. The inference from the initial tranche of subpoenaed documents is that the Justice Department's actions were a reaction to these political circumstances rather than a legitimate law enforcement response to any serious nationwide threat. The administration's goal seems to have been silencing the critics of its radical education policies and neutralizing an issue that was threatening Democrat Party prospects in the close gubernatorial race in Virginia. This weaponization of law enforcement powers against American parents exercising their First Amendment rights is dangerous. The Justice Department subjected moms and dads to the opening of an FBI investigation about them, the establishment of an FBI case file that includes their political views, and the application of a threat tag to their names as a direct result of their exercise of their fundamental constitutional right to speak and advocate for their children, unquote. I've got 2.5 minutes left. I want to ask each of our gracious witnesses, Mrs. Neely, Mr. Langhofer, Ms. Justice, I'd ask each of you to answer quickly one or both of these questions. One, what would you like to say to those who don't see parental rights as something that needs to be fought for? Or two, what do you think are the next big challenges your groups and all of us may face in the battle to protect parental rights? Ms. Neely, I'll start with you.
The chilling of parental rights is absolutely clear. Mr. Langhofer and I used to sue over campus free speech issues, and what we found through bias response teams is that it wasn't just the prosecution of one student. It was telling one student, getting one student in trouble for something that they may have said, often constitutionally protected speech, that then sent a message to every single other student on campus, or in this case, K-12 schools, who holds the same opinion. You say that thing out loud, we'll come for you too. There is a reason there are not as many protests on college campuses these days, because students are not inviting controversial speakers whatsoever. We saw what happened to Judge Duncan 2 weeks ago at Stanford Law. I doubt that there will be very many Fifth Circuit judges invited to speak at law schools in the future, and that will be to the detriment of America's children.
I interviewed Judge Duncan, my former colleague, on my podcast, and he had a lot to say about that. Mr. Langhofer.
I think the most important threat to parental rights is the belief that government officials think that they know better about raising these children than their parents. I've had hearings where school officials indicate that they think that they have the right and the knowledge to make important decisions about the transition of these young children without telling the parents, without having any kind of medical diagnosis, without having any kind of medical intervention, and then indicating that they're doing this across the board. There's no threat of any kind of parental problems here. And so this notion that government officials know better than parents is the biggest threat to the parental rights, and it's something that every citizen, no matter your political beliefs, should absolutely be concerned about.
Well said. Ms. Justice?
I want to be clear that there are private conversations happening between teachers and counselors and children behind the backs of parents without their consent or knowledge. I think that's one of the most dangerous things that's happening right now. The Department of Justice and the FBI made a fatal mistake when they decided to go against parents and to try to divide parents and their children. There is no power that supersedes the love of a parent for their child, and we will not be pushed out of the way in decisions about our children's education or their future.
Very well said.